Karen's fake HOA cops crash a wedding with guns. A racist vendetta exposed. All right, folks, strap in and welcome back to HOA Karen Files, where we dive headfirst into the wildest, most unhinged tales of HOA tyrants and suburban showdowns that'll make your jaw hit the floor. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button and join our crew. Today's story is a doozy that'll have you on the edge of your seat from the get-go. Picture this: a beautiful wedding, vows about to be exchanged, and then bam, fake HOA cops with real guns storm in. All because of a Karen's racist grudge. This isn't just drama, it's a legal firestorm that exposes corruption, land grabs, and one man's fight against a power-hungry menace. We're talking betrayal, FBI raids, and justice so sweet it'll make you cheer. Hit that like button if you're ready for chaos and drop a comment. Ever seen a Karen ruin a wedding? Let's dive into the madness at Silver Pines. Silver Pines was a picture-perfect suburb, the kind of place where folks dreamed of raising kids and retiring in peace. But beneath the polished lawns and white picket fences, a storm was brewing, fueled by Karen, a woman who ruled the HOA like a dictator. Her target? James, a young groom who dared call out her bigotry. Her weapon? Fake cops, real guns, and a vendetta that would tear a community apart. Silver Pines wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a showcase. Every house gleamed with fresh paint, every lawn was a green velvet carpet, and every mailbox stood at precisely 42 inches. The Silver Pines Homeowners Association kept it that way, or rather, Karen did. A 54-year-old former event planner with a blonde bob sharper than a guillotine. Karen had clawed her way to HOA president 3 years ago and hadn't loosened her grip since. Her colonial-style mansion, complete with a chandeliered foyer and a security system rivaling Fort Knox, was the crown jewel of Silver Pines to Karen. The neighborhood wasn't a community, it was her kingdom, and she was the queen. Karen's rulebook, a 400-page monstrosity, was her scepter. She enforced it with zeal, patrolling in her custom golf cart, dubbed the Overseer, with a megaphone and a stack of violation notices. A mailbox half an inch too short? $200 fine. A rose bush with unapproved pink blooms? $150 penalty. A kid's bike left on a driveway? $300 and a tow threat. Karen didn't just penalize, she targeted, and her biases were no secret. Families of color, like the Garcias or the Patels, faced harsher fines than their white neighbors. When Mr. Patel planted a traditional marigold garden, Karen slapped him with a $500 aesthetic violation, claiming it clashed with community standards. When Mrs. Garcia hung a Mexican flag for Independence Day, Karen issued a $400 fine for unauthorized displays. Whispers of racism followed, but nobody dared confront her, until James was 32, a software engineer with a quick smile and a backbone of steel. The son of Agent Richard, a high-ranking FBI official, he'd grown up in Silver Pines and returned to plan his wedding to Elena, a school counselor with a laugh that lit up rooms. James's family home, a modest 2-story with a wraparound porch, was where he'd proposed and where they'd host their wedding. But James wasn't just a groom-to-be, he was a man who'd had enough of Karen's tyranny. At a packed HOA meeting in June, he stood up, his voice steady but blazing. "Karen, your fines are unfair," he said, eyes locked on hers. "You're targeting families like the Patels and Garcias harder than anyone else. It's not about rules, it's about prejudice." "That's wrong and it's gotta stop," the room gasped. Mr. Patel nodded, Mrs. Garcia clutched her husband's hand, and even timid Mrs. Larson, a 68-year-old retiree, clapped. Karen's face turned crimson, her megaphone trembling. "How dare you accuse me of bias?" she shrieked. "This is my neighborhood and I keep it perfect. You're out of line, James." "I'm not done," James shot back. "Your fines are bankrupting people. Where's the money going? Show us the books." The crowd murmured, emboldened. Karen slammed her rulebook down. "This meeting is over," she barked, storming out. But James's words stuck, and Silver Pines began to stir neighbors, like Mr. Patel started questioning fines, and Mrs. Garcia filed a complaint with the town. Karen, humiliated, vowed revenge. James had no idea what he'd unleashed. Behind her mansion's locked doors, Karen seethed. She didn't just want James silenced, she wanted him crushed. His wedding, set for late July, was the perfect target. She scoured the dark corners of the internet, finding Silver Pine's compliance force, a shady outfit promising armed HOA enforcement for $700. The site was vague, but Karen didn't care. She wired the money, her hands shaking with glee. "You'll regret crossing me, James," she muttered, picturing his wedding in ruins. James, meanwhile, was focused on love. He and Elena planned a backyard wedding with fairy lights, a string quartet, and 100 guests. The Garcias offered homemade tamales, Mrs. Larson baked a pecan pie, and Mr. Patel strung marigolds around the porch. But James wasn't naive. He'd heard Karen's golf cart circling his street at night, her megaphone silent, but her presence ominous. He called his father, Richard, a grizzled FBI agent with 30 years on the force. "Dad, Karen's up to something," he said. "She's unhinged." Richard, voice calm but sharp, replied, "Keep your eyes open, son. I'll dig into her. Nobody messes with my boy's wedding." Sonny, Karen's empire was cracking, but she was too blinded by spite to see it. Silver Pines was about to become a battleground, and James's wedding would be ground zero. July 28th dawned bright and warm, the kind of day made for love and celebration. James's backyard was a vision. White chairs lined the lawn, a floral arch framed the altar, and marigolds glowed under fairy lights. Elena, radiant in her gown, laughed with bridesmaids as the quartet tuned their strings. Guests arrived, their chatter mixing with the scent of tamales and pecan pie. James, dashing in his tux, adjusted his tie, grinning at Mr. Patel. "Couldn't have done this without you," he said, gesturing to the marigolds. Mr. Patel winked. "Anything to stick it to Karen." But trouble was brewing. Karen, parked a block away in the overseer, watched the wedding through binoculars. Her lips curled in a sneer. She'd planned her strike with precision, citing Rule 47C, no unpermitted gatherings over 50 people. James hadn't applied for a permit. Nobody did in Silver Pines, but Karen saw her chance. Her compliance force was due any minute, and she relished the chaos to come. At 3:55 p.m., just as the officiant called for silence, a battered SUV roared into Silver Pines, its HOA enforcement decal peeling off. Out stepped Vince and Tony, the fake HOA cops. Vince, a 42-year-old ex-con with a fake badge and a real Glock 19 tucked in his belt, swaggered like he owned the place. Tony, a wiry 35-year-old with a rap sheet for fraud, clutched a forged citation, his eyes darting nervously. Their black polos marked Silver Pines Security were wrinkled, but the gun was no prop. Karen met them at the curb, her megaphone dangling. "There," she hissed, pointing at James's backyard. "That illegal wedding's a disgrace. Arrest that troublemaker James for violating Code 47C. Make it public." Vince smirked. "Easy money, lady. We'll shut it down." Tony, sweating, muttered, "Vince, you said no guns. This is a wedding." Vince glared. "Relax, it's for show." The quartet struck up Pachelbel's canon as Elena stepped toward the aisle. James, waiting at the altar, beamed, until screams broke the music. Vince and Tony stormed through the gate, Vince's Glock glinting, Tony waving the citation. "Freeze!" Vince bellowed, "This wedding's illegal. James, you're under HOA arrest." Guests gasped, chairs toppled, and Elena froze, her veil trembling. James stepped forward, hands raised. "What the hell is this? You're no cops." Karen rolled up in her golf cart, megaphone blaring. "You broke the rules, James. No permit, no wedding. These officers are my authority." Guests booed, but Vince silenced them, raising his Glock, not aimed, but visible. "Back off, or things get ugly," he barked. Tony, panicking, dropped his citation. "Vince, let's go. This is bad." But Karen shoved him. "Do your job. I paid you." Elena, tears in her eyes, grabbed James's arm. "They can't do this," she cried. Mr. Patel, furious, stepped up. You're targeting James because he called you out, Karen. This is racism, plain and simple. Mrs. Garcia joined, waving a tamale spatula. Leave them alone, you bully. Mrs. Larson, clutching her pie, shouted, This is our neighborhood. The crowd surged, a wall of defiance, but Vince's gun kept them at bay. James, calm but steely, locked eyes with Vince. You're not cops, and that badge is fake. Put the gun down, or you're in deeper than Karen. Vince laughed, but his hand shook. Karen, unhinged, screamed, Arrest him! He's a menace! The standoff was a tinderbox with 100 guests, a bride, and a groom caught in the crosshairs. Unbeknownst to Karen, Mrs. Larson had slipped away, dialing Agent Richard. Mr. Richard, they've got guns at James's wedding, she whispered. Richard, in his FBI office, went cold. Stay safe, Mrs. Larson, I'm on my way. He hung up, calling his team. Karen's vendetta had just poked the wrong bear, and Silver Pines was about to feel the FBI's wrath. The backyard of James's Silver Pines home was a frozen tableau of shock and fury. Fairy lights flickered above toppled chairs, the floral arch sagged, and the string quartet's notes had dissolved into silence. James, in his tuxedo, stood with hands raised, his eyes locked on Vince, the fake HOA cop whose Glock 19 glinted in the midday sun. Vince's hand trembled, the gun pointed downward but menacing, while Tony, his twitchy partner, scrambled to pick up his dropped citation, muttering, This is a mistake, Vince. Karen, perched in her golf cart like a vengeful queen, blared through her megaphone, Arrest him, you fools! James is ruining Silver Pines. Elena, James's bride, clung to his arm, her white gown stark against the chaos, her voice shaking but defiant. You're a monster, Karen. This is our wedding. The 100 guests, friends, family, neighbors, were a powder keg. Mr. Patel, his marigold garland still in hand, shouted, You're doing this because James called out your racism. Mrs. Garcia, brandishing her tamale spatula, advanced, yelling, Get out of here, you fake cops! Mrs. Larson, the 68-year-old retiree who'd called Agent Richard, clutched her pecan pie like a shield, urging guests to stand firm. Don't let her bully us, she cried. The crowd surged, their boos drowning Karen's megaphone, but Vince's gun held them back, a silent threat in a sea of anger. James, his FBI training from his father kicking in, kept his cool. Vince, you're no cop, he said, voice steady. That badge is fake, and you're breaking about 10 laws right now. Put the gun away and maybe you walk out of here. Vince's smirk faltered, his eyes darting to the crowd. Tony, now at the SUV's door, hissed, Vince, let's bail. There's too many of them. Kanam, but Karen wasn't having it. She leapt from her golf cart, her blonde bob bouncing, and shoved Tony. I paid you to finish this, she screeched. James is a threat. Arrest him now. The standoff teetered on disaster. Elena's mother, a petite woman in a lilac dress, fainted, caught by a groomsman. Kids hid behind parents, and the officiant, a nervous pastor, whispered prayers. But Silver Pines wasn't Maple Ridge. This community had been pushed too far. Patel grabbed a garden rake, holding it like a lance. You want James, you go through us, he roared. Mrs. Garcia rallied her cousins, forming a line. Even timid Mr. Henderson, a 72-year-old accountant, picked up a folding chair, trembling but resolute. This is our home, he shouted. Vince, outnumbered and sweating, lowered his gun slightly, his bravado cracking. You're all crazy, he barked, but his voice wavered. Karen, oblivious, kept screaming, Do it! I'm in charge! That's when the distant wail of sirens pierced the air, faint but growing louder. Mrs. Larson, back from her call, whispered to Mrs. Garcia, Richard's coming. Karen's done for. The crowd's courage swelled, their chants of, Leave! Leave! Shaking the backyard. James saw his chance. He stepped forward, hands still raised, his voice cutting through the chaos. Vince, Tony, you're in over your heads. Karen's using you to settle a score, and that gun's gonna land you in prison. Drop it, and you might get a deal. Tony, panicking, threw his citation down and bolted for the SUV. I'm out, he yelled. Vince hesitated, his gun dipping further, but Karen grabbed his arm. Don't you dare quit. I'll have your heads. Her desperation was palpable, her empire crumbling before her eyes. The sirens were closer now, red and blue lights flashing at the end of the street. Vince's nerve broke. He shoved Karen away, holstering his Glock, and sprinted for the SUV. But in his haste, he tripped over a sprinkler. Sprawling on the grass, James lunged, kicking the gun under a table, out of reach. The crowd cheered, closing in as Vince scrambled to his feet and dove into the SUV. Tony floored it, the vehicle screeching out of Silver Pines, leaving Karen alone, her megaphone silent, her golf cart surrounded by furious neighbors. Karen's face was a mask of rage and fear. "This isn't over!" she shrieked, shaking a fist at James. "You'll pay for this, you and your little diversity crusade." But her words were drowned by the crowd's jeers. Elena, tears streaming, hugged James. "You're safe," she whispered. James nodded, but his eyes were on the approaching police cruisers. In a black SUV with tinted windows, unmistakably FBI agent Richard had arrived, and Karen's vendetta was about to meet its match. The police, led by Officer Martinez, a no-nonsense veteran who knew Richard, secured the scene. "James, you okay?" Martinez asked, eyeing the chaos. James nodded, "Just glad nobody got hurt. Those guys were Karen's hired goons. That gun's real. Check under the table." Martinez retrieved the Glock, bagging it as evidence. He turned to Karen, who was trying to slip away in her golf cart. "Ma'am, you're staying right here," he said, blocking her. Karen sputtered, "I'm the victim. James broke my rules." But the crowd shouted her down. "She's a racist. She hired thugs. Check her books." Agent Richard stepped out of the black SUV, his gray suit crisp, his eyes like steel. "Karen," he said, voice low but lethal, "you targeted my son. That was a mistake." He nodded to his team, who fanned out, securing the area. Richard pulled James aside. "You all right, son?" James hugged him. "Yeah, Dad. But Karen's not just after me. She's hiding something big." Richard's jaw tightened. "I know we've been watching her. This ends today." Silver Pines was a crime scene now, its wedding-turned-war zone cordoned off with yellow tape guests huddled in groups, giving statements to Officer Martinez's team. While Elena comforted her mother, her gown streaked with grass stains, James stood with Richard, watching FBI agents photograph the backyard. Their radios crackling. Karen, cuffed and seated on her golf cart, alternated between sobbing and screaming. "This is persecution," she wailed. "I'm protecting Silver Pines." Silver Fawn, but nobody was listening. Her reign was unraveling, and the truth was clawing its way out. Richard had been suspicious of Karen for months. James's complaints about her fines had prompted him to dig, and what he'd found was a web of corruption. Karen wasn't just skimming HOA dues, she was funneling thousands into a shell company, Pines Development LLC, tied to a shady real estate mogul, Victor Crane. Crane's plan: buy up Silver Pines lots at rock-bottom prices, bulldoze the homes and build luxury condos. Karen's role was to make life hell for residents, fining them into bankruptcy so they'd sell cheap. Her racism wasn't just personal, it was a tool, targeting minority families like the Patels and Garcias to drive them out faster. The wedding ambush was Karen's fatal misstep. Richard's team had traced her $700 payment to Silver Pines Compliance Force, a front for a scam run by a career criminal. Mikey, Russo, Vince, and Tony were low-level muscle, hired for intimidation, but their real guns, Vince's Glock was stolen, had escalated things to federal territory. Richard knew Karen's vendetta against James was personal, sparked by his racism accusation, but it was also strategic, silencing a vocal critic who demanded transparency. At James's house, Richard briefed Martinez. "Karen's been laundering HOA funds," he said, showing bank records. "She's pocketed $20,000 in fines, and Pines Development's got another $50,000. Her fake cops are part of Russo's racket. Same crew hit HOAs in 3 states. Martinez whistled. "She crashed a wedding for this?" Richard nodded. "She wanted James humiliated. Now she's got the FBI on her tail." Karen, overhearing, tried to bolt, but an agent blocked her. "You can't prove anything," she spat. Richard held up a USB drive. "Your emails to Crane beg to differ. You plan to sell out Silver Pines, Karen. That's fraud, conspiracy, and with that gun, attempted assault?" Karen's face went pale, her megaphone clattering to the ground. Meanwhile, Vince and Tony didn't get far. Their SUV, tracked by Richard's team, was stopped 20 miles out, the duo cuffed in a gas station parking lot. Vince, defiant, tried to pin it on Karen. "She told us to scare the kid," he growled. Tony, breaking, spilled everything. "Russo runs the show Karen paid for maximum impact. We didn't know it was an FBI kid." Their confessions recorded were gold for Richard's case. Back in Silver Pines, the community rallied. Mr. Patel organized a meeting at the community center. Packed with residents, Mrs. Garcia presented a ledger of fines, showing minority families paid 70% more. Mrs. Larson, emboldened, revealed Karen's secret meetings with Crane, overheard at a coffee shop. "She's selling our homes," she cried. The crowd roared, demanding Karen's ouster. The HOA board, spineless under Karen's thumb, resigned on the spot. Richard's team raided Karen's mansion, seizing laptops and files. One email, dated a week before the wedding, was damning. "James is a problem, remove him, or Crane pulls funding." Another showed her funneling $5,000 from fines to her personal account, marked consulting fees. The evidence was a house of cards, and it was collapsing. Karen, now in a holding cell, tried to play victim. "I was protecting property values," she sobbed to Martinez. But Richard wasn't fooled. He called James. "Son, we've got her: fraud, conspiracy, and hiring armed thugs." "She's done." James, holding Elena's hand, nodded. "What about Silver Pines?" Richard's eyes gleamed. "We're not just saving your wedding, we're saving this neighborhood." As night fell, Silver Pines buzzed with defiance. Residents posted no sale signs on their lawns, vowing to fight. Crane, James, and Elena, exhausted but unbroken, stood under their floral arch, promising to redo their wedding. Karen's empire was in ashes, but the real reckoning was coming, in a courtroom where justice would strike. The Silver Pines Community Center, usually a sleepy venue for book clubs and bake sales, was transformed into a battleground of truth on a crisp October morning. The courtroom overflowed with residents, their faces a mix of anger and hope. As Karen faced her reckoning, the once mighty HOA president sat at the defendant's table. Her sharp blonde bob wilted, her tailored blazer replaced by a rumpled sweater. Gone was the megaphone, the golf cart, the aura of invincibility. Across from her, James and Elena sat hand in hand, their wedding scars still fresh but their resolve unbreakable. Agent Richard, in a crisp gray suit, stood with the prosecution, his FBI badge gleaming like a promise of justice. The trial was a spectacle, broadcast on local news and dissected in every Silver Pines living room. The district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Evans, laid out a devastating case. Karen faced a litany of charges: fraud, conspiracy to commit unlawful detention, hiring armed criminals, and embezzlement, with an added civil rights violation for her discriminatory fining practices. The courtroom buzzed as Evans presented the evidence Richard's team had unearthed. Bank records showing $20,000 in HOA fines funneled to Karen's personal account, emails tying her to Victor Crane's land grab scheme, and a paper trail linking her to Mikey Russo's Silver Pines compliance force. James took the stand first, his voice steady but heavy. "Karen targeted me because I called out her racism," he said, recounting the HOA meeting where he'd challenged her bias against families like the Patels and Garcias. "She hired fake cops to ruin my wedding, all to silence me. They brought a real gun to my backyard." The jury, a mix of retirees and working-class locals, leaned forward, their faces grim. Elena followed, her testimony raw. "I thought we'd lose everything," she said, tears falling. "Karen didn't just attack us, she attacked our community." Jurors wiped their eyes as she described the terror of Vince's Glock. Mr. Patel's testimony was a gut punch. He presented a ledger of fines showing his family paid $3,000 in penalties over 2 years, compared to $500 for white neighbors. Karen called my marigolds tacky, he said, voice shaking. It wasn't about rules. It was about who I am. Mrs. Garcia, clutching her husband's hand, detailed similar harassment, her Mexican flag fined as disruptive. The civil rights charge gained weight, the courtroom simmering with outrage. Vince and Tony, in orange jumpsuits, testified under plea deals. Vince, surly but cooperative, admitted Karen's orders. She said, "Make James regret it," paid us $700 for the job. Tony, visibly shaken, spilled the scam's guts. Russo's outfit hit HOAs across the country. Karen knew we weren't legit, but she wanted the muscle. Their words sealed Karen's fate, linking her to Russo, who'd been arrested in a federal sting, his compliance force dismantled. The bombshell came when Evans introduced Karen's emails to Crane 1, sent days before the wedding, read, "James is rallying the minorities. Shut him down, or we lose Silver Pines." Another detailed her plan to bankrupt residents, forcing sales to Crane's Pines Development LLC. "We'll clear $2 million once the condos go up," she wrote. The jury gasped, and Karen shrank in her seat, her victim act crumbling. Crane, subpoenaed, claimed ignorance, but his shifty demeanor didn't help Karen's case. Karen's defense was a desperate flop. Her lawyer, a budget hire with a bad tie, argued she was protecting property values and misled by Russo. Karen took the stand, fake tears streaming. "I love Silver Pines," she sobbed. "I was framed by James and his FBI father." But Evans shredded her, replaying her megaphone rants from the wedding, captured on a guest phone. "You called James a menace for demanding transparency." Evans said, "You hired armed thugs to punish him. That's not love, that's a vendetta." The jury's glares said it all. After 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Karen, pale and trembling, was sentenced to 3 years probation, $25,000 in restitution to residents, and, most humiliating, 200 hours of community service, cleaning Silver Pines parks and streets. Vince got 2 years for firearms charges, Tony 1 for fraud. Russo faced 7 years for racketeering. Crane's company was fined, his condo plan scrapped. Silver Pines began to heal. The HOA, under new leadership from Mrs. Garcia, slashed the rulebook to 5 pages, banning fines and focusing on unity. Residents planted marigolds in solidarity, and James and Elena rescheduled their wedding, this time at the community center, with 200 guests and no permits needed. Mr. Patel led a toast, his voice proud. "To Silver Pines, our home, not Karen's kingdom." The crowd roared, glasses clinking under fairy lights. Karen's first day of community service was a spectacle. In an orange vest, she swept leaves under Mrs. Larson's watchful eye, her face burning as kids giggled. "Keep going, Karen," Mrs. Larson teased. "You missed a spot." Silver Pines had won, not just a trial, but a future. James and Elena, dancing at their wedding, knew the cost of that victory and the power of standing up. And there you have it, folks. The insane saga of Karen's fake HOA cops crashing a wedding with real guns, all for a racist vendetta. From a backyard ambush to an FBI takedown, Silver Pines fought back and won. If this drama lit a fire in you, smash that like button and subscribe to HOA Karen Files for more epic showdowns. Drop a comment. Ever faced a Karen this unhinged? Check our playlist for more justice-fueled chaos, link below. Thanks for riding with us. See you next time for another wild HOA battle. Silver Pines Justice.